Alexander Pearce was a petty thief from Ireland that had used all of his chances with the legal system. For his continued crimes, he was sent thousands of miles away to work at a penal colony in what is now Tasmania. In 1822, he and 7 other inmates escaped and set off for the wilderness, but the land was extremely treacherous, barren of anything but vegetation for hundreds of miles. The getaway was poorly planned, as after 15 days, the men had run through their food rations and they were starving, and with no other options, they resorted to cannibalism to survive. When Alexander was the only one left out of the 8 escapees, authorities didn't believe his story about the others being eaten, feeling like he was still protecting his partners in crime. Alexander came to the colony on a forgery charge, but he left it hanging from the gallows, as his daring escape would go down in the stuff of legends. Welcome to history's biggest villains. Alexander was born in 1790 in Portmannigan, Ireland. He was a small man, standing about 5'4" with brown hair and blue eyes. He worked as a farm laborer, but he was caught stealing 6 pairs of shoes in 1820. He was sentenced to 7 years transportation, being sent to Hobart, Van Diemen's Land, a penal colony in an area now known as Tasmania. While serving his sentence, Alexander didn't stay out of trouble. On May 16, 1821, he received 50 lashes for stealing 2 turkeys and 3 ducks. On September 17th, he received 25 lashes for stealing wine, plus drunk and disorderly conduct. On November 29th, he received 50 lashes for stealing a wheelbarrow. In May 1822, he escaped into the woods, remaining there for a while, even forging a money order. When he was recaptured, he was sent to Macquarie Harbor on Sarah Island. This was the harshest penal colony in 19th century Australia. This place was truly in the middle of nowhere, as the surrounding waters were so treacherous that only a small number of convicts ever arrived, as several ships were lost as they attempted the harrowing passage. Outside the camp, vegetation stretched for hundreds of miles, seemingly barren of any animal life. The forest was so dense that there was no prison walls, as officials believed that any escapees wouldn't survive the trek to the wilderness. This place was designed to break the spirit of the prisoners, as they were frequently beaten for the slightest offense. They had to deal with limited supplies, frequent floggings, freezing cold weather, and grueling labor. In May 1822, Alexander was a part of a logging operation on the colony, but with only one overseer, the convicts easily overpowered them and escaped. They managed to steal a boat, but they were spotted, so they had to abandon that plan and take their chances in the impassable wilderness. Along with Pearce, the group consisted of Alexander Dalton, Thomas Bodenham, William Kennerly, Matthew Travers, Edward Brown, Robert Greenhill, and John Mather. Greenhill, who had an axe, assigned himself as the leader, plus his past as a sailor meant that he had the most navigational skills out of the group. Despite this vast environment with the massive amounts of vegetation, there was nothing to be hunted. So after 8 days, the men were starving and desperate. With no other options, some of the men in the group started plotting about who they should kill for food. Alexander Dalton seemed to be the first on the menu, mostly because he was a volunteer who issued floggings to the prisoners who broke the rules back at the colony. Due to the extreme abuse the inmates already suffered, those among them who volunteered to enact the same upon their own were universally hated. Now that their minds are made up, Dalton was hacked to death with an axe, and the 7 starving men dug in. The next morning, there were only 5 men left. Edward Brown and William Kennedy couldn't get over the guilt of the fact that they had just eaten another human being, so they felt that the penal colony was a better option, heading back under the cover of darkness. They managed to find their way back, but they both died within days of returning, possibly of exhaustion, or due to the severe punishment they endured for escaping. Eventually, the energy from their first meal as fugitives had depleted, so the group drew lots to determine who was next, and Thomas Bodenham was the unlucky one. This left just 4, Alexander, Matthew Travers, Robert Greenhill, and John Mather. Well, now only 3, as John was eaten after 5 weeks on the run. The situation looked bleak for our main character, as Matthew and Robert, the one holding the axe, were good friends. However, things were getting better for the crew, as they finally made it to the mountains, now in an area where they could scavenge for food. But this new terrain was extremely unforgiving, as while drinking water from a creek, Travers was bitten on the foot by a tiger snake, one of the most poisonous in the world. He was going to die, unless the bite was treated with antivenom, but that didn't exist yet, so he was still going to die. With his end imminent, Greenbow raised the axe, and the remaining 2 men ate their fill. But now the biggest dilemma was in front of them, as there were only 2, Pearce and Greenhill. Neither one of them trusted the other, so now it was a battle to stay awake the longest. After 8 days, Robert finally collapsed, and Alexander took advantage. He was able to get the axe without waking him, and with one swift blow, he secured a few more days of life. So after 2 months on the run, Pearce was the only survivor out of 8. He managed to make it to the edges of the Tasmanian colonies on the east coast, stumbling upon a herd of sheep grazing in a field. Overcome by hunger, he killed one of them and gorged himself, but he was found by the shepherd, who happened to be an old friend. Seeing his destitute appearance led them to tell Pearce about a gang of bushrangers, a group of escaped convicts just like him, who survived by stealing sheep from other farmers and selling them for a profit. He joined the gang, but they were all captured about a month later by Tasmanian authorities. The examining magistrate in his case was the Reverend Robert Knopwood, and he had 20 years of experience in the field, so his antennas were up, as Pearce was a convict that was supposed to be at Macquarie Harbor. When asked how he made it across the island, Pearce gave a full confession, explained the details of their escape, how they had turned on each other, and the multiple instances of cannibalism he had committed. The story was so shocking that Knopwood didn't believe it at all, deciding that Pearce had been at the story to cover for the others who had escaped with him. Alexander was hopeful for the death sentence in order to permanently escape his situation, but he was sent right back to Macquarie Harbor. Now that he had escaped once, Pearce was fitted with restrictive iron shackles on his legs. This not only limited his movement, it showed the other inmates that escape was possible. One man who became particularly interested in Pearce was Thomas Cox, an Englishman who had been in Tasmania since he was 17. While his initial crime is unknown, he had a life sentence, unlike most who were there for only 7 years, so I'll leave it up to you to infer. He was a flight risk as well, having escaped the colony himself before being caught and sent back. Facing the reality of the rest of his life in this hell on earth, Thomas planned another escape, and he had equipment, stolen fish hooks, a piece of flint for fire starting, and scorched rags to use for tinder. He spent months trying to convince Alexander to join him, and he was hesitant, but after being flogged for stealing a shirt, he changed his mind. While they were on a foraging mission, the duo bolted into the wilderness. This time, the journey wasn't as long, as Pearce gave up after 11 days, lighting a signal fire and surrendering to a passing boat. Being picked up by the mouth of the King River, the pilot of the boat recognized him, and Pearce said that Thomas drowned in the river. When searched, he had a piece of human flesh in his pocket, which at first he said he cut from Thomas's corpse to prove that he was dead. Pearce then changed his story and admitted to killing him. The next day, he was taken out to locate Thomas's body for retrieval, and the scene was horrific. His head and hands were severed, and the corpse was disemboweled, as flesh had been carved from the arms and legs. A bloody axe lay nearby, which Pearce admitted was the murder weapon. When they got to the prison, he had a confession to make. Pearce and Cox had planned to go around the coast to reach the settlement of Port Dalrymple, since he knew how barren the mountains were. When they reached the King River, Cox finally revealed that he didn't know how to swim, and Pearce became so angry that he killed him with the axe. He then butchered the corpse, but a wave of guilt caused him to throw the body in the river before eating it, keeping the peace with him to prove his crime before signaling the boat. Pearce said at the time that he was ready to die for his crimes, but once the trial began, he changed his tune, being charged with murder but pleading not guilty. His defense was that he killed Thomas during an argument, only being guilty of manslaughter. The previous confession he made to Reverend Knopwood was well known by jurors, and while the judge told him to disregard it, it didn't really matter, as Pearce was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. Before he died, he made a final confession. While this one differed in minor details, the crux of the story was identical to the previous ones, with his last words being, "Man's flesh is delicious. It tastes far better than fish or pork." His sentence was carried out on July 9, 1824 at 9 a.m. This case marked several firsts in the Tasmanian justice system, being the first felon to face execution under the new Supreme Court framework. Additionally, his confession made him the first known individual within the Tasmanian courts to admit to acts of cannibalism. His skull was sold by the surgeon who dissected him to American naturalist and skull collector Samuel George Morton and housed at the Penn Museum in Philadelphia. Thank you guys. I really appreciate y'all for the support. I think I might have mispronounced it. Is it Macquarie? But this story was very unique. I wanted to do something kind of different from your typical serial killer story, but I could just imagine the environment at that time. Like, you have nowhere else to go. They send you to this random island that's thousands of miles away. You're separated from everyone you know, and you're supposed to work there for however long your sentence is. Basically, this is just unregulated. They can do whatever they want to you. Even if you escape, there's just like empty forest that you're going to die in because there's nothing you can eat. Like that's crazy. How is there no animals? There's no birds they can kill. There's no types of foxes or anything. No deer. Like, I appreciate y'all for the support. Thank you. I appreciate the new subscribers to the channel, man. We are really getting close to that 900 subscriber mark. I appreciate y'all for the support. I really do. Thank you. Please be safe. Stay on the grind. I'm out. Peace.